What if everything you were taught about healing, about wholeness, about finding yourself, was only half the story? What if the missing piece wasn't something new you needed to discover, but something ancient you needed to remember? In a world that constantly tells us to disconnect from our roots, from the earth, from our ancestors, one voice rises with a different message. This is the story of living resistance. Welcome to Legacy Book Insight, where we explore the books that don't just inform us, but transform us. Today, we're diving deep into Caitlin B. Curtis's profound work, Living Resistance, an indigenous vision for seeking wholeness every day. This isn't just a book review. This is a journey into what it means to be truly whole in a fractured world. This is about resistance as a daily practice, not a single act. This is about remembering who we were always meant to be. Caitlin Curtis is a Potawatomi author, speaker, and poet who writes from the intersection of indigenous spirituality and Christian deconstruction. Her voice carries the weight of generations, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the courage of someone who has walked the painful path of reclaiming identity after it was nearly erased. Living Resistance is her invitation to all of us, indigenous and non-indigenous alike, to understand what wholeness truly means and how we can practice it every single day. Caitlin Curtis is a Potawatomi author, speaker, and poet who writes from the intersection of indigenous spirituality and Christian deconstruction. Her voice carries the weight of generations, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the courage of someone who has walked the painful path of reclaiming identity after it was nearly erased. Living Resistance is her invitation to all of us, indigenous and non-indigenous alike, to understand what wholeness truly means and how we can practice it every single day. But before we go further, let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly whole? Not happy for a moment, not distracted from your pain, but actually whole, like all the scattered pieces of yourself finally came together? For most of us, that feeling is rare, fleeting, almost impossible to grasp. And Curtis tells us why. Because we've been taught to seek wholeness in all the wrong places. We've been taught that wholeness is something we achieve, something we earn, something outside ourselves. But what if wholeness is actually something we remember, something we return to? Something that's been inside us all along, waiting for us to stop running and start listening. Living Resistance begins with a fundamental truth that challenges everything modern culture teaches us. Wholeness is not about perfection. It's not about having everything figured out. It's not about reaching some final destination where all your problems disappear. Wholeness, Curtis teaches us, is about integration. It's about bringing all the parts of yourself, even the broken ones, even the painful ones, even the ones you've been taught to hide, and saying, "This is me, and all of me is sacred." For indigenous communities, this understanding of wholeness has never been lost, even when everything else was taken away, even when their land was stolen, their languages forbidden, their children removed, their ceremonies banned. The vision of wholeness remained. Because you cannot colonize the human spirit's deep knowledge that we are connected to everything, that we belong to the earth, that our ancestors walk with us, that healing is possible even after unimaginable trauma. Curtis shares her own story with raw honesty. She was raised in a white, evangelical community, disconnected from her Potawatomi heritage, taught a spirituality that demanded she reject parts of herself to be acceptable. She describes the journey of what many call deconstruction, the painful process of dismantling the beliefs that no longer serve you, that were perhaps never truly yours to begin with. But deconstruction, she teaches us, is only half the journey. The other half is reconstruction, or perhaps more accurately, remembering. Remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. This is where the concept of resistance enters the story, and it's not what you might think. Resistance in Curtis's vision, is not violent. It's not angry, though anger has its place. It's not about tearing down, though sometimes things must be dismantled. Living resistance is about the daily practice of choosing wholeness in a world that profits from your fragmentation. It's about choosing connection in a culture of isolation. It's about choosing to honor your ancestors when society tells you the past doesn't matter. It's about choosing to listen to the land when everything around you screams that nature is just a resource to be exploited. This is where the concept of resistance enters the story, and it's not what you might think. Resistance, in Curtis's vision, is not violent. It's not angry, though anger has its place. It's not about tearing down, though sometimes things must be dismantled. Living resistance is about the daily practice of choosing wholeness in a world that profits from your fragmentation. It's about choosing connection in a culture of isolation. It's about choosing to honor your ancestors when society tells you the past doesn't matter. It's about choosing to listen to the land when everything around you screams that nature is just a resource to be exploited. Every morning you wake up and choose to remember your worth. That's resistance. Every time you slow down in a culture of hurry, that's resistance. Every time you choose community over individualism, that's resistance. Every time you honor the earth as sacred rather than property, that's resistance. Every time you tell the truth about who you are instead of performing who others want you to be, that's resistance. Curtis structures the book around daily practices, small acts that seem simple but are actually revolutionary. She writes about the practice of breath, of literally remembering to breathe deeply and intentionally. In indigenous traditions, breath is sacred. It's the first gift we receive at birth and the last thing we release at death. Breath connects us to every living thing, to the trees that create the oxygen we need, to the ancestors whose last breaths released into the air we now breathe. To breathe consciously is to participate in the sacred cycle of life itself. She writes about the practice of gratitude, but not the superficial gratitude that ignores pain and injustice. Real gratitude, she explains, doesn't pretend everything is fine. Real gratitude acknowledges both beauty and suffering, both joy and grief. It's the ability to hold complexity, to say, this is hard, and I'm grateful I'm alive to experience it. This is painful, and there is still beauty here. I am broken, and I am whole. One of the most powerful sections of the book explores the concept of land acknowledgement. In many progressive spaces today, events begin with someone reading a land acknowledgement, a statement recognizing the indigenous peoples on whose traditional lands an event is taking place. Curtis both appreciates and challenges this practice. Acknowledgement is important, she says, but it cannot be the end. It must be the beginning. The question isn't just, whose land am I on? But what is my relationship to this land? What is my responsibility to the people who were here first? How do I move from acknowledgement to action? How do I move from words to solidarity? For non-Indigenous readers, this question of solidarity is crucial and uncomfortable. Curtis doesn't let anyone off the hook with easy answers. She invites us into the discomfort of confronting how we benefit from systems of oppression, how the very ground we walk on was stolen, how the prosperity many enjoy was built on genocide and erasure. But she doesn't leave us drowning in guilt. Guilt, she explains, is useless unless it transforms into something else. Grief, then responsibility, then action. The book explores the indigenous concept of the seventh generation, the idea that our decisions should be made with consideration for how they will affect people 7 generations into the future. Imagine that. Imagine making choices today based not on what benefits you this quarter, this year, or even this lifetime, but based on what will create a livable world for people you will never meet. This is the opposite of the short-term thinking that created the climate crisis, the extraction economy, the burn-it-all-down approach to resources. This is long vision. This is love extending beyond yourself into a future you'll never see. Curtis also writes beautifully about storytelling as resistance. In indigenous cultures, stories are how wisdom is preserved, how identity is passed down, how healing happens. Stories are medicine. When colonizers tried to destroy indigenous cultures, they knew that banning stories, languages, and ceremonies would be more effective than any weapon. Because if you can make a people forget their stories, you make them forget who they are. And if they forget who they are, they'll accept any identity you impose on them. But the stories survived. They survived in whispers, in secret ceremonies, in grandmothers teaching grandchildren in hidden moments. And now, in what Curtis calls the indigenous renaissance, these stories are being reclaimed, retold, and reshared with power. To tell your story, your true story, not the story society wants you to tell, is an act of defiance. To share your people's stories is to say, we are still here. You did not erase us. You cannot erase us. We remember. Throughout the book, Curtis weaves in teachings from Potawatomi culture and other indigenous traditions. She writes about the importance of ceremony, of marking sacred moments, of creating intentional space for connection with the divine, with nature, with community. In a culture that has largely abandoned ritual, that views spirituality as a private, individualistic pursuit, this communal, ceremonial approach feels both ancient and urgently needed. She discusses the concept of two-eyed seeing, an indigenous teaching about using both indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge, learning to see with both eyes rather than privileging one over the other. This isn't about romanticizing indigenous wisdom or rejecting all Western thought. It's about integration. It's about recognizing that indigenous peoples have thousands of years of wisdom about living in right relationship with the earth, with community, with the sacred, and that this wisdom is desperately needed in our current crisis. One of the most moving chapters addresses intergenerational trauma. Curtis doesn't shy away from the reality that trauma is passed down through generations, that the wounds of colonization, forced removal, boarding schools, and ongoing marginalization don't disappear just because time passes. But she also shares the hope that just as trauma can be inherited, so can healing. When one person begins to heal, to remember, to resist, it creates ripples that extend backward to ancestors who carried pain and forward to descendants who will inherit a different legacy. She writes about her own children, about what it means to raise indigenous children in a world that still doesn't fully see them, still doesn't value their cultures, still carries the myths and stereotypes that justified genocide. She writes about teaching them their language, their stories, their ceremonies. She writes about the fierce love required to say, "You are Potawatomi. You are sacred. You belong to something ancient and beautiful and unbreakable." The book also explores the concept of kinship, not just with humans, but with all of creation. In indigenous worldviews, we are related to everything. The trees are our relatives. The water is our relative. The animals are our relatives. The rocks, the wind, the stars, all our relatives. When you understand this, when you truly internalize this, you cannot harm the earth without understanding you're harming family. You cannot pollute the water without understanding you're poisoning your relative. This isn't metaphor. This is reality. Curtis addresses the appropriation of indigenous spirituality by non-indigenous people seeking enlightenment or healing. She's clear that this is harmful, that taking ceremonies, symbols, and practices out of their cultural context and commodifying them is another form of colonization. But she also offers a path forward, explaining that there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation, between taking and being invited, between consuming and standing in solidarity. As the book moves toward its conclusion, Curtis returns to the central theme. Wholeness is a daily practice. It's not something you achieve once and maintain forever. It's something you choose again and again in small moments throughout your day. It's choosing to pause and breathe when you're overwhelmed. It's choosing to speak truth when lying would be easier. It's choosing connection when isolation feels safer. It's choosing to honor your body, your needs, your limits in a culture that demands you sacrifice yourself for productivity. Living resistance means resisting the narratives that tell you you're not enough. Resisting the systems that profit from your insecurity, your disconnection, your exhaustion. Resisting the idea that you are separate from nature, from your ancestors, from the sacred. Resisting the belief that healing is selfish or that rest is laziness. Resisting the pressure to be anything other than exactly who you are. First, practice daily remembering. Take time each day to remember who you are beyond your job, your roles, your achievements. Remember your ancestors, your lineage, your heritage. If you've been disconnected from your roots, begin the journey of reconnection, even if it's painful, even if it's complicated. Second, develop a relationship with the land where you live. Learn its history, its original inhabitants, its ecology. Spend time outside without agenda, without trying to achieve anything. Just be present to the earth as a living relative who deserves your respect and care. Third, tell your story. Find safe people and spaces to share your true story, not the edited version, not the performance. Let yourself be witnessed in your wholeness, including your wounds. Fourth, practice kinship. Expand your circle of concern beyond humans to include all living things. Make choices that honor your relationship with water, air, animals, plants. Fifth, resist the culture of hurry. Slow down deliberately. Breathe deeply. Create space for silence, for reflection, for simply being rather than constantly doing. Sixth, if you're non-Indigenous, educate yourself about Indigenous history and ongoing issues. Move from acknowledgement to action. Support Indigenous-led organizations. Return land. Amplify Indigenous voices. Confront your own participation in systems of oppression. Seventh, embrace both slash and thinking. You can be broken and whole. You can be grieving and grateful. You can be deconstructing old beliefs and constructing new ones. You can hold complexity without needing to resolve everything into simplicity. Living Resistance is ultimately a book about hope. Not naive hope that ignores reality, but Indigenous hope, the hope that persists through genocide, through removal, through every attempt at erasure. The hope that says, we are still here. We will always be here. And if we survive that, we can survive anything. And if we can heal from that, anything can be healed. Caitlin Curtis's words are medicine for a sick world. They're a reminder that the solutions to our modern crises, our loneliness, our disconnection, our environmental destruction, our spiritual emptiness, have been here all along in Indigenous wisdom that was never lost, only ignored. Living Resistance is an invitation to stop ignoring it, to stop dismissing it, to listen, to learn, to change. This book will challenge you. It will make you uncomfortable. It will ask you to examine beliefs you've never questioned, to confront privileges you've never acknowledged, to take responsibility in ways you've avoided. But it will also offer you something precious, a path to wholeness, a vision of what life could be if we lived in right relationship with everything and everyone. A hope that healing is possible, both personal and collective. The question Curtis leaves us with is simple but profound. What would your life look like if you practiced living resistance every single day? What would our world look like if we all did? Thank you for watching Legacy Book Insight. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment below sharing what living resistance means to you. What small act of resistance will you practice today? Remember, Wholeness is not a destination. It's a daily choice. It's a practice. It's resistance. And it starts right now. Thank you for watching.